So my name is Jen, and I am a recovering Pharisee. And this is when you all go, "Hi, Jen." Well, it is so freeing to just get that out there. I mean, still a recovery, still work in progress, but good to get it off my chest. I'll back up and explain a little bit why I call myself that. To me, a Pharisee were religious hypocrites. They had the head knowledge of what God taught, but they failed to let it change their hearts, so they were blind to the truth of the mess that they actually were. And this was very similar to how I see myself as my early Christian life. I was blessed to be raised in a Christian household, was taught much of the Bible, was familiar with words like righteousness and Trinity from preschool. But having it really enter my heart and change my actions took a little longer to get there. And as such, I was pretty blind to my own sins. So much so that my mom's favorite phrase was, "Why don't you take the boulder out of your own eye before you worry about the speck in somebody else's?" So for the kids in there, Mom was telling me, stop worrying about the little sin that you see your sister having and worry about that big, bulky sin you got going on. Over the years, like many Pharisees, I became pretty self-confident and self-righteous. But God's power is made perfect in our weakness. So where I was a weak mess, He was the strength that I needed. And He has been gently opening my eyes and slowly humbling me and chipping away at that self-righteousness and self-reliance. And one of the many verses that God has used to both humble and encourage me is 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9 and 10. And it has become one of the verses that has shaped my faith. "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of weakness, so that Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong." And in this passage, we get to touch a little bit about Pharisees, a little bit about weakness, and even a thorn in Paul's side. So we're going to get started. We start out hearing from our man Paul. Now, a little background on Paul was that, like me, he was a Pharisee. He too was raised to know the right things, raised to do the right things, but it really missed the point and instead became a hypocrite. Except that unlike me, Paul, or Saul back then, was actually a legit Pharisee. He was an esteemed religious leader for Israel, and he was pretty much the ultimate Pharisee. He had major Pharisee status. He had the right bloodlines. He had been taught by the right Pharisee teachers. He had it all. And he was also pretty sure he followed all of those rules. And others were pretty sure of that too. Although I have to wonder if his mom saw the boulder. Paul was a zealous follower of God and had achieved expert-level self-righteousness. Great at seeing how perfect he was and how wrong all the followers of Jesus were. Until one day, God knocks him off his horse on the road to Damascus and waking him up, telling him the truth. And there, Paul is not only converted to believe in Jesus, he's actually given the ultimate transformation story. God takes away his sight. He speaks to him audibly. He tells him that he, Jesus, is Lord. He continues to bless him with visions and revelations, even top secret information from God that he's not allowed to share with anybody, which is totally unfair, but that's okay. And when we open chapter 12, we see Paul sharing some of these facts, and saying that he could have boasted a lot. He could have boasted or relied on his status as a Pharisee, but he doesn't. He could have bragged on his epic transformation, but he doesn't. He could have boasted about the special treatment that he received from God to get people to listen to that message, but he doesn't. even though those were all true statements and therefore not foolish, he does not boast. Not only does he not boast, Paul is reticent to even write about these things, which is why, as you look at that passage, he's speaking in the third person. And instead, he says he's going to boast about his weakness. Boast about weakness? Being proud of or boasting in weakness just sounds crazy. But at least weakness itself is something I can relate to. I mean, I have no idea what I'm doing up on the stage. I am not the most trained Bible student in this room. I am not the most intellectual person in this room. I am definitely not the most experienced speaker in the room. And have I earned this in some way? No, quite the opposite. I can say I've even messed up in some pretty epic ways. Have I told you about the time I coordinated a multi-family international trip that resulted in the people and their small children being homeless because I put the wrong dates in? True story. But I digress. Being weak, or meaning the absence of strength and confidence or gifting in some area, is something that I can relate to. But boasting in that weakness, that's foreign. Not only foreign in our culture and Paul's gladiator-enthused culture, it's certainly not something that I feel confident doing, and still not easy for me. To acknowledge my sin and areas that I don't perform well in, and then to move past them and go all the way to boasting about those shortcomings is quite a leap. So when God first used this verse with me and exposed me to what it looks like to boast in weakness, I was in a situation much like this one, where I felt weak. I was called to do something out of the area of my strength or my giftings. I was in my early 20s, and I was excited and felt honored to be asked to lead a women's Bible study. That is, I was excited until I saw the list of the ladies I was going to be leading. Because on that list were women who had decades of experience and study ahead of me. There were lists of ladies on that, or there was names on that list, rather, that had mentored my mentors. So very intimidating for me. And all that excitement turned to fear. And those feelings of weakness just flooded in. Much like how I feel standing up here, I felt like, what on earth can I offer? How can I really be the right person for this job? Feeling weak and under-equipped. So I went to God. And God gave me a little thorn, like Paul, to humble me so that I could get on the right track. And he started out by reminding me where I was looking at that moment. I was looking at myself and what I could do. I like to call it the gospel according to Dr. Phil, who I can't say I'm his biggest fan, but he did get this right. It ain't about you. God often has to remind me that this life that he gave me, it ain't about me. It's about him. And that Bible study wasn't about what I knew or what I could do. It was about him. And he knew I needed that course correction. That redirection, reminding me to focus not on my ability or lack thereof, but in all my ways to acknowledge him and to rely on him. In Paul's case, God knew that the many blessings he had given him, and he knew Paul's potential for pride. So he intervened. He gave Paul a thorn in his side. Now, we're not told what Paul's thorn was. Some people have said that it had something to do with his eyes from when he was blinded, and it was a physical pain like that. Others have speculated that it could have been more mental. He calls it a messenger of Satan, so maybe it was more mental. Like the nagging voice and reminder of his past sins and what he had done to the Christians. Maybe an idea that he wasn't good enough. Whatever the thorn was, to Paul, it was significant. Way more than the little redirection I had. Because the word thorn that they used there, it was translated, not the little prickly bush we have in the woods out back. This was a sharp stake or device for torturing or impaling someone. So this was torture for Paul. This was a significant thing that he struggled with. So I don't blame him for asking God to remove it, but God had a different plan for him. And he may have a different plan for our thorns too. God knew that as much as Paul didn't want that thorn and it wasn't comfortable for him, it was in fact the very thing he needed to humble him and to keep him on the right track, preparing for his ministry. God knows how to balance our lives and how to best grow us in preparation for what's coming. And those torturous parts of life that God allows are exactly what we need to. So once humbled, Paul and I were ready to hear what God had for us. And this is my favorite part. I love when God speaks. So in verse 9, God says, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." It encouraged me to know in that moment that my inexperience and my weakness could in fact be used for his glory, that his grace was all I needed. And that by acknowledging my weakness and instead inviting him in, his greatness would be even more evident. My own neediness, insecurities, fears of insufficiency were actually made beautiful because they were to remind me of the need of God and to draw me close to him. So by boasting in my weakness, that Bible study would be blessed. Not because of my strengths or my abilities or my giftings, because I had left room for his greatness. Had I relied on my own ability that year and not acknowledged my weakness, he would never have been invited in the same way. He encouraged me to know that where I might be tempted to shrink away is actually a huge opportunity for him. So hear me, my friends, when I say that the times in your life that you think, I can't possibly do that, or those times of weaknesses, they're not disadvantages when seen in the light of God's strength. They are opportunities. So take a moment and reflect to yourself, where do you feel weak? Because right there is a place to serve God. Do not miss that opportunity for God to use you and draw you closer to him in the process. So back to our text, Paul says, therefore, which is where he transitions from teaching to application. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. So it's time, my friends, for us to have some action here, to look at our lives and see, where are we not leaning into his all-sufficient grace? Where are we still self-reliant and not God-reliant? To look at ourselves and ask, Lord, where am I weak? And then offer to step in and rely on him. To ask ourselves, am I proud and combative? Or instead, am I content with the thorns of weakness, insults, hardships, persecution, and calamities for his sake? Are we not to be content in all circumstances? For when we are weak, then we are strong, because it is he in us who shines. This always makes me think of Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit indwelled the believers, and they're speaking in all the different languages. And so many people are in awe, surprised that these simple men could be doing these great things. It was their simplicity that made God apparent. That could be us. We too are indwelled by the living God who can do the impossible. So if God's grace is sufficient enough to save our very lives, and it is it not enough to equip you where you're weak? To remember, it ain't about us. It's about the one in us. So where is it that you feel weak? Do you feel ill-equipped to speak to adults like me? Or is it children? I know I've heard people say, oh, I couldn't help in Kids Kingdom downstairs. I'm not a teacher. But God's power is made perfect in our weakness. Or I can't talk about my feelings or apologize for that thing I did. I'd look weak. But God's power is made perfect in our weakness. Or I can't share my faith or my testimony. I'm not knowledgeable enough, or I'm not outgoing enough. But God's power is made perfect in our weakness. These are opportunities for God to be invited in where we're weak. He can be the strength, and he can shine. Where is God asking you to boast in your weakness? Maybe for you, it's saying, I will volunteer once a month with kids or teens, even though I don't think of myself as a teacher. Or maybe I will sign up for a small group or a Bible study, even though I'm not really comfortable in social situations. Or maybe it's, I will say sorry to the person that I wronged, even though I don't really want to. Maybe I will open up to my spouse, even though I don't like talking about feelings. Or maybe I will sing or even clap during worship, even though I don't think I'm musically inclined. But my friends, let's not stop there. Let's not stop with stepping out and boasting in our weakness. There's even more that we can glean from this passage. We at New Community use the phrase, we are called to live and love like Jesus. So let's learn from Paul, but let's also learn from God in this passage and see what he did. He encouraged Paul. He held him accountable. And he provided all that Paul needed to succeed. So how can we do those same exact things for those in our lives? How can we be like that for the people that are stepping out in their faith and boasting in their weakness before us? If you are the wife of an emotionally clumsy husband who is trying to step out of his comfort zone and share, encourage, and love him like Christ. If you are the one who was hurt and owed an apology, forgive and embrace in love like Christ would. If the person next to you is tone deaf and singing out for Jesus, you smile and join them in singing out in worship too, without judgment. And if you see someone stepping out in faith and trusting God, honor that with encouragement as Christ would, and get ready to see God at work. My friends, his grace is sufficient for you, for his power is made perfect in our weakness, so let's live like it. May you boast in your weakness, and may the power of Christ rest upon you.